So we're going to use trig in order to solve for x. So the very first thing we're going to do is I want everybody to grab your calculator, and I want you to find where it says mode, and then mode is right here, and I want you to go all the way down. Right now it's in radians, and we're going to turn it into degrees and then press enter. Once you've done that, we can just clear the screen. That's the first thing we have to do. The next thing is we have to look at what we're given. So I have an angle. So we are used to evaluating the angle, and we would see this theta sign. Now we're actually going to be given an angle measurement, a clear angle measurement. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to look at the sides we have. So I know that the diagonal always represents the hypotenuse. And in this case, x represents opposite, and down here then is going to be the remaining is going to be the adjacent side. Okay, so I am looking to find the opposite, and I have the hypotenuse. At the very top, let's write this down because it will not be on the board. Oscar had a heap of apples. I'm writing the first letter as I say that phrase. Oscar had a heap of apples. Now this is going to give me insight into the sine, the cosine, and the tangent. How to take two sides of a right triangle and compare them accordingly. So I'm looking at my three options and saying, okay, which one talks about opposite and hypotenuse? Okay, that's sine. Here we go. Sine of the angle 32 degrees is equal to opposite, I don't know what that is, over the hypotenuse. My goal is to isolate the x. So what I need to do is I need to get rid of this 12. Right now we're dividing by 12. Opposite of dividing by 12 is multiplying by 12. Now the 12 on the right hand side, the top 12 and the bottom 12, you may think of them as canceling out. Really they are going to simplify to 1, but I'm left with x on the right, and now we're going to plug this in together. So 12 times, and I'd like you to put that 12 in front, times the sine of 32, and I'm going to have to estimate this. And so we're going to round to the nearest hundredth. That means two places after the decimal, 6.3, and now I have to decide, do I keep it at a 5, or do I bump it up one digit based on the number in back? So through 6.36. Now this is an estimation, so estimations look like this, 6.36. I'm looking at example number 2, and again our goal is how do I use trig functions to solve for the missing value. So I'm looking at this right now. This is the angle that I'm going to use. And okay, opposite would be directly across. The diagonal is always going to be the hypotenuse. That leaves this side being the adjacent side. So Oscar had a heap of apples. I'm going to move this back up. It looks to me like I need to know the adjacent and I have hypotenuse. Which one of these specifically uses adjacent and hypotenuse? It would be cosine. It would be cosine. So I'm going to come back here and write cosine of angle 64 degrees equals, and it's going to be the ratio. It's important the order you write them that matters. So it's adjacent divided by hypotenuse. Adjacent divided by hypotenuse. And just like we did example number 1 to isolate the variable, I'm going to multiply both the left and the right by 7. If you walk into class late, it's important you put your calculator into degrees or you will not get the correct answer. We're going to take 7 times the cosine of 64. We're going to round to the nearest hundredth. That's going to be your direction. So if you round wrong, you'll get the answer wrong. So 3.07. And we also need to show that we're rounding. So approximately 3.07. Now I purposely chose this one. That would be a little more difficult. So this is going to be my opposite side. This is the hypotenuse. And then this leaves this being the adjacent side. So I'm looking at which of the major trig functions, sine, cosine, and tangent, talks about opposite and adjacent. And I can see up above that'd be tangent. Tangent of 25 is equivalent to the opposite over the adjacent. So what makes this difficult? I want to show a few different ways that we can do this. So I'm going to write this down twice, and you'll choose which way makes the most sense to you. Okay, here's one way. One way is to put a 1 underneath the tangent of 25 degrees. And after you've done that, we're going to cross multiply. So I have x times the tangent of 25 degrees is equal to 1 times 8. And now I can divide by the tangent of 25, divide by the tangent of 25, and x is isolated. So I come over here and I'm going to go 8 divided by parentheses. Again, I have to be in degrees. I'll move this down so you can see tangent of 25, making sure I use my parentheses, and I have x is approximately 17.16 when I round to the nearest hundredth, 17.16. Now, what's another way we could do it? Another way is that we can't multiply by 8. We have to multiply by what's on the bottom because opposite of dividing by x is multiplying. So I could multiply by x first. Okay, got it. And now once I've done that, these are going to be eliminated on the right side because they are going to simplify to 1. Now I'm like, okay, but now I need to isolate the x. And x is being multiplied by the tangent of 25. So I'm going to divide by the tangent of 25, and I'm doing that because opposite of multiplying is dividing. And now x is by itself. Again, I'm plugging in 8 divided by the tangent of 25, and I get the same answer, 17.16, when I go ahead and round it. All right, here we go. So I believe that it's most important to start with what do we have. So this is the angle that I'm going to be evaluating in order to find this missing length. This would be considered opposite. The diagonal is always going to be considered the hypotenuse. And then this other side is going to be considered the adjacent. So what am I looking at? I'm looking at opposite and hypotenuse. So again, at the top, I'm going to write this down. Okay, Oscar had a heap of apples. This is going to be reminding me what to do for sine, for cosine, and for tangent. So I'm looking up above and saying, which one talks about opposite and hypotenuse? It's the sine. So the sine of 64 degrees is going to be the ratio or fraction of opposite over hypotenuse. Always make sure if you happen to grab your calculator that you are looking into it and that you are already in degrees, okay? So how many of you choose to do the cross multiplying right away? Just by hands up if you're in my classroom, okay? I'm going to do that right now. You don't have to do this way. I'm going to go, okay, x times, let's change that, times the sine of 64 degrees equals 1 times 6 is 6. Now to isolate this x, opposite of multiplying is going to be dividing. Divide by the sine of 64. The sines, you may think they just cancel out, but in reality, they're going to simplify to 1. And I'm going to grab my calculator, and how you plug this in matters. So after I do 6 divided by, I'm going to put a parenthesis and do the sine of 64. Using my parentheses, again, I'm going to have to round, so it's approximately 6.6. Now, do I keep it a 7 or do I bump it up? I'm going to bump it up because behind the 7 is a 5. 5 or greater, we bump up. Here we go. Let's do this last one for this. Let's go over this. So once you look at the angle in which you're given a measurement, we're going to identify the sides. So this is going to be opposite. The diagonal is always going to be the hypotenuse, and then the other side is going to be adjacent. So I have an adjacent, and I'm trying to find hypotenuse. So again, I'm just going to continue to write this down so you remember. Oscar had a heap of apples. The first letter when I say that phrase, it's going to be sine, cosine, and tangent. So when I look up there, which one has adjacent and hypotenuse? The cosine. So the cosine of angle 18 degrees, and it's going to be a ratio, and it goes in this order. Adjacent on top and hypotenuse on the bottom. All right, now it's time. I'm going to cross multiply. X times the cosine of 18 degrees is equal to 1 times 12, which is 12. Now to isolate the x, opposite of multiplying is dividing. I'm dividing by whatever I want to get away from the x, because I want to isolate the x or get x by itself. That's all the work I need to show. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to type in 12 divided by, using that parentheses, and doing the cosine of 18 and 2 parentheses, and I have x is approximately 12.62. 12.62 is this missing length. Approximation is the key.